Now, our attention is to the issue of democracy and the need to make it all-inclusive, not just for every politician, but for youths across Africa. The population of most African countries are dominated by youths, and so when you see groups call for inclusion of youths in politics, it is a move to indeed capture a greater percentage of the continent's population into the democratic and governance process. In Nigeria, the Not Too Young to Run bill is famous for indeed expanding the scope of political turf to bring in more young people into elective positions. And at the continental level, the African Union has been making several efforts, advocacy efforts, to prevail on politicians and governments to really follow the footsteps of Nigeria and even do more in bringing more young people into their democratic process. We shall be taking a look at the efforts of the continental body, and we have an official of the African Union with us, but we'll meet him after this short break. Please don't get away.
We see community action for good governance. They see poverty and want. We see perseverance and the will to go on. They see economic law. We see the ingenuity and creative spirit of our people. We are AIT News, fresh, authentic views of Africa. How would you rather see the world? AIT News, all sides, all the time.
Promoting the inclusion of young people in democratic and governance process is our focus, and like I told you earlier, an official of the African Union Commission based in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, Ambassador Salah Hammad, head of the African Governance Section, Department of Political Affairs of the AU Commission, is joining me to take a look at continental efforts at expanding the political space in Africa. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
So what is it like? Are youths in Africa excluded by design, or was it just against the run of play that we are seeing such situations?
I would say maybe both, in fact, and that is why the African Union Commission, as the continental organization, has decided, in fact, to launch this campaign to involve the youth in Africa in the electoral processes. Simply, Africa is the youngest continent, as we all know. The youth are the majority of the population in this continent, and therefore, I think it is extremely important for the involvement of youth in the electoral processes in all African countries. Exclusion will not help. The participation of youth will definitely contribute to the development of the continent and to make Africa a better place to live for all of us together.
What do you hope to achieve with your various campaigns in terms of percentages, in terms of other criteria?
Well, first of all, in fact, we seek from this campaign to bring in the youth, to make them part of the process. And instead of seeing our youth, African youth, crossing to Europe, dying in the Mediterranean, dying in the Red Sea, trying to flee the country and the continent, we want them, first of all, to seek ownership, to be part of this process. This is number one. Number two, we aim also to orient the youth of their duties and rights at the same time. And thirdly, without the youth, there is no politician, in fact, can succeed to assume an office, since they are the majority across the board. And that is why it's important for the youth participation in all of these processes.
To go beyond mere voting during election to participating, running for elective positions.
Indeed, we want them, in fact, to run for offices. We want them to assume responsibility simply because they have to be part of the development process. They have to be part of the leadership process. The youth are the leadership of today. They are also the leadership of tomorrow. And without them, in fact, we will not succeed in developing our countries and improving the living standards of our people. They are the majority after all. So therefore, they have to really be part of these processes, and that is why we are launching this campaign. This is now the second consultation that we are having. We had the first consultation 2 weeks ago in Arusha, Tanzania, for the east and the southern part of Africa. This consultation in Abuja for the central and western part of Africa. And hopefully in a week or two we'll be in Tunisia for the northern part of Africa. And hopefully after we accomplish all of this, then we will be able to bring all of the recommendations made through these consultations to the policy organs of the African Union.
So who are you reaching out in these various consultations?
We are, in fact, reaching out to the young people of Africa, men and women, youth. We want them to be oriented of their rights and duties, and also of the roles in terms of becoming a candidate or voting for a candidate, or how to even be part of the electoral processes. Of course, the image that we all are aware of and familiar with is to see the youth protesting against a result, for example, the youth not happy with an outcome of an election, the youth damaging the public property. But definitely there's another role for them to play, and that is why we want to engage them. And since they are the asset of the continent, they have to be part of the process for sure.
Are you engaging with governments, lawmakers across the continent? Because by laws in some countries, such as Nigeria, there's age restrictions to running for elective positions, though efforts are currently ongoing to lower those age barriers.
In 2006 and 2007, the African Union introduced two major charters, the Youth Charter and the African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance. So these two charters, in fact, provide provisions for the involvement of youth in the electoral processes. The Youth Charter, for example, determined the youth age from 18 to 35. So all the ratifying parties, all member states, including Nigeria, for example, once they ratify these two charters, they have to then implement them and domesticate them at the national level. And of course, that will lead to changes of laws and rules at the national level as well. So this is another, in fact, objective of this campaign, is to popularize these two charters. So then African countries, all of them, will achieve the universal ratification of both charters.
What does the two charters say about age limits for participation in politics?
For example, the African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance is speaking about a minimum of 18. So as
minimum of
18 years old. So as of 18
to run for elected.
To run for exactly.
And it's the same age for you to be authorized to vote in an election.
Absolutely. So we hope by achieving the universal ratification for these two charters, we will see more young people as members of parliaments and also members of the executive and other, other offices across the board. Because again, without the participation of youth, I don't think we'll be able to achieve what we want to achieve, and that is, of course, a prosperous, united, and peaceful Africa.
Well, there are some shining examples in the just concluded general elections in Kenya. A 24-year-old was elected the youngest parliamentarian.
Absolutely.
I don't know whether it's across the African continent. Even in Nigeria, we have some few examples.
Absolutely.
But some people express disappointments at their performance in office. The issue of capacity of the youths to effectively take advantage of elective position to make meaningful impact in society is one major issue.
Well, we have to remember and remind ourselves that youth have not been given the space before. So they are just being given the space now. So they need time to develop their capacities.
Learn from their mistakes.
And learn from the mistakes that we have across the board. So that is one. And then in addition to that, it is important, of course, to allow them also to be part of the process, to learn from the experiences of those who are ahead of them, for sure. So I think once the youth are given the chance, they will absolutely be able to give back to the community. We have, as you mentioned, successful stories in Kenya, in Nigeria, in the Gambia as well. So there are so many successful stories here and there, and I'm sure if the youth are given the space they need, there will be more successful stories in more African countries.
The Kenyan example was striking. Just some few days ago, I read of how he went to the parliament, the inauguration of the parliament, using public transportation, public bus.
Absolutely.
Now, what do you expect the young people, apart from showing humility and associating with the people, the whites, I mean, everybody in the society, without showing some social status? What do you expect them to bring into politics?
We want them to really bring, I would say, a new form of politics, a new way of practicing politics in Africa. It is no longer about the individuals that are leading the process. It's about them giving back to the communities that voted them in. And this guy, this young man in Kenya, I would say he was not really exaggerating, because he meant it. And we've been in touch with him, and we have learned how he was in fact elected, because he was able to build networks among the young people in Kenya. And
that's why you must encourage youths elsewhere to do building of networks.
And in fact, this is what we are doing through the campaign that we have launched. We are not really building political parties for the youth, but what we are trying to do is to educate them, to build their capacities so they can be part of the process, and then to give back to the community. Our goal as African Union is to empower the youth, because without them, if they are left behind, then definitely we will not be able to achieve all the goals that we would like to achieve. So again, the campaign is to bring the youth in and to allow them to have that sense of ownership of the process and to be part of the process and to give back to the communities, build the societies that they came from, with all sense of humility, of course. And in addition to that, to do the right thing, fight corruption, try to empower women, give back to the community, build the schools, education, and all what we need in Africa, so at least we can have Africa, the Africa that we really want, the Africa that we are dreaming about, the Africa that will be a better place for our children to live in, our grandchildren to live in. And that is the goal from this campaign, in fact.
Well, good institutional support from no less an organization like such as the African Union. It tells you that indeed across Africa is a problem, exclusion of the youth from politics. What have been the drawbacks?
The image, the bad image, of course, that is now attached to the youth in Africa, that they are only there to just do negative things and not to really be positive or part of any movement that is aiming at the development of the continent. The number of youth that are leaving the continent, that's another issue. Of course, unemployment in Africa is really a serious problem. But bringing youth in, building their capacities, would also allow them to think of creatively of different ways to create jobs, small jobs at the national level. And then, of course, these jobs will progress and become a source of employment for others. Our intention, in fact, is to identify the challenges, identify the problems, and then through the engagement of youth, think of recommendations on the way forward, how to solve the problem, how to address them. It's not going to be an issue that will be solved overnight. Of course, it will need time. But since we are on it together, collectively, without any exclusion of anyone, including the youth, then definitely we'll be able to do the right thing.
Let me end this interview with this question,
yes,
with the Nigerian situation,
yes,
in perspective.
Yes.
The Not Too Young to Run movement in Nigeria.
Absolutely.
How do you evaluate it?
I would say this movement has been endorsed, in fact, by the African Governance Architecture Program of the African Union, and we are quite happy with the success that has been achieved so far by the movement here in Nigeria. And by the way, it is no longer a Nigerian initiative. The initiative has been endorsed by the United Nations, and now many African countries, many non-African countries, have been in fact endorsed the initiative, and I would say even in some Asian countries, some American countries, the youth are really inquiring about this initiative, and I think this is a very successful story to tell. And we hope through this kind of successful stories that African youth everywhere in Africa will be able to run, because the age should not really be the problem if the youth are ready to give back to their societies and communities.
Okay, Ambassador Salah Hammad is the head of the African Governance Section, Department of Political Affairs of the African Union Commission. The Commission has been indeed providing institutional support to young people across Africa to encourage them, promote them to get more involved in politics, also putting pressures on the politicians, the governments, and the parliaments to amend the laws where necessary to remove the barriers, and indeed that prevent young people from joining their governance process, expanding the political space, you may say. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very
on the
much
program
for
today. Wish you good luck with your initiatives.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thanks for being part of it. My name is Amb Salah Hammad. Let's see you on Thursday. Have a good evening.